Okay, let's have a look at the next question, which is obviously our Google Sheets fans out there. How many people are actually using it? 20 to 50% of the time, people use Google Sheets, less than 20. I do use it sometimes, but never for financial modeling. I think, it has its use case, but when it comes to building proper models or building proper analysis, not a hell of a lot. So more than 70% of the time is quite significant, I guess, for those that are, depending on what they're doing with Google, in terms of the, what sort of analysis you're running. Definitely great for online, but again, if you want some power, if you've got lots of data, you are going to struggle on the Google platform. And also just remember, it's not your data anymore. In Google, you're actually handing over all your data to Google. So if you read the T's and C's, any data and any information in that spreadsheet is technically Google's, not yours. And so security-wise, you've got to be very careful what you put into a Google Sheet, what you put into anything on Google for that matter, including their browsing, so that's just something to be wary of.
Is that for their consumer version or their business as well, business version? Because there's a paid business version.
There's a paid business version, but I think you've got to negotiate pretty hard in terms of how that security works. You've got to make sure you. So I'm not a security expert, but I'd say, again, read the fine print with Google, because I'd say even then, I wouldn't necessarily assume that it's security. I wouldn't assume that your data is not available for Google, but certainly the free version, yes. But if you're on G Suite, just a normal paid version of G Suite, your data is not yours. You'd have to go to really big enterprise to negotiate that. Okay, a bit of a trick question. If you had inconsistent time periods and varying funding and investment rates with cash flows, which IRR calculation would you use? So if you're doing any form of financial modeling, and in many cases you have to compare returns and cash flows of different items, and for those that have been seeing this, I do share the answer quite a lot on LinkedIn and other places, but it's quite interesting how not many people are familiar with this particular challenge. And, IRR is a set measure that assumes a level of consistency on all your cash flows. It also assumes the same reinvestment rate as what's in the cash flows is going back in. Modified IRR modifies your reinvestment and funding rate, so you adjust your funding rates. But the time periods are exactly the same and consistent. And if you're building a financial model, in many cases, your time periods are not consistent. Your cash flow when it goes in to when it comes out is not going to be the same. So XIRR allows you to ping and put a time series against those particular cash flows that gives you a better, more accurate IRR in terms of timeline. And certainly that's the majority of what people use. And that's certainly what I use in investment banking, which is why you see 57%. But you cannot modify the reinvestment and funding rates. So it actually doesn't exist, which is why the actual answer is the 36%, none of the above. What you actually have to do is you have to combine both IRR and XIRR, MIRR and XIRR to have an XMIRR, and you've got to code that as a custom function. And we'll talk about custom functions later with Lambdas or in VBA, but right now you can't actually do that with the current Excel functions. If you want to change the reinvestment rate, cash comes off a project, might go into a bank account, might go on a fixed deposit, you're not going to earn that same return on the same asset. Having said that, across the board, investment banking, everyone uses XIRR. So that's the industry norm, which is, again, what you see in most cases. I love asking this question because when people come and say, yes, they know financial modeling or they can build a financial model, do they know what a three-way cash flow model is, or a three-statement model, or three-statement integrated model? And I guess when I started Model Citizen 8 years ago, this was a very, very low percentage in terms of how many people said yes. And ultimately, it's about Now, hopefully that's going to change through time, but this might actually be the moment when yes is more than no, which is really good to see. So a three-statement model, or three-way model, or an integrated model is integrating your income statement, your balance sheet, and your cash flow. And if you don't have a balanced balance sheet, how can you be certain that your income statement is correct or the cash flow is correct? And I ask people, what's more important, income statement, balance sheet, or cash flow? Cash.
Equal.
They're equal.
You can't have one without all the others.
So you have to choose one above the others.
Let's say trial balance. If you haven't got your trial balance, nothing else matters after
Well,
that.
what's a trial balance?
Everything. It's your balance sheet.
Balance sheet.
Plus your liabilities and
Balance sheet.
assets, and
So your balance sheet. Your balance sheet effectively is also your earnings.
retained earnings. But
So your balance sheet is the most important, because if your balance sheet doesn't balance, how can you be certain that your cash flow is correct? And what is cash? It's a balance sheet item. Cash is king, absolutely. Because cash is actually a balance sheet item. So your balance sheet is actually more important, but 9 times out of 10, balance sheets get ignored. Either too hard, too difficult. And so we ignore that and we just pray to God that our cash flows would be correct.
I've wanted to know how to prepare one of these for a long time, and I know that Danielle had one of her courses where it was taught at the very end of the subject matter. Can anyone recommend anywhere I can go to sort of learn this? I know there's probably something online, but yeah.
So the Financial Modelling Institute, which I've got a slide on at the back, and by the way, you'll get the slides, so don't worry about taking we run a training course, as Danielle does, to prepare people for that exam. It's the Advanced Financial Modeler, and that you build in 4 hours a 3-statement model from scratch. So that is the exam question. Largely consistent in terms of what you're getting given. You can prepare quite easily, but you have to get your schedules right. You have to link up your P&L, balance sheet, and cash flow. That I would say is probably the best place to do, because one, you're under time pressure. It gets you into that mode of practicing to get your format and your structure correct. Most times it's about structure and the design more than the actual complex maths, because it's not the maths is actually not that complicated. Once you know accounting, you know that every time you put a P&L entry, it needs to go to the balance sheet or cash flow and balance sheet, or vice versa, or P&L cash flow. It might not even touch the balance sheet if you've got a cash sale. So you've got to build that in the exam. So definitely have a look at the Financial Modelling Institute. Both Daniel and I are approved trainers, and it's something which I think is a really important skill to learn and develop. And there's some free stuff that they've got as well on their website. Can you clearly define the difference between financial analysis, data analytics, and financial modelling? And I find that often these terms get mixed up and muddled way too much. And so people say, oh, you can do financial analysis, but how's that different to financial modelling? How's that different to data analytics? Anyone want to have a go at that or giving a definition of those three in the room? I think people online are muted, but.
I'll have a crack if whatever. So financial analysis is looking at a set of financial information and using that information to work out the health of a business or a company.
Ratios.
It can be ratios.
Analysis just to really understand what's going on. And yep, I'd agree with that. Everyone agree with that as a good starting point?
Other analytics. That's drilling into the little bits and pieces that make up those headline numbers, and actually, well, that's what I do with it, and looking at the trends. So you're going back in time, and if you're doing modelling, you're going forward in time.
Is data analytics always backward looking?
Not necessarily. I'd argue that it also includes a lot of non-financial information.
Yep.
Which financial analysis is generally financial.
I like where you were going because it is deeper, but
It's all right. I'm quite relaxed about all this. It just starts the conversation.
yeah, in many respects, I think people think data analytics is only backward looking, and it's not. Is anyone else? Predictive analytics and prescriptive analytics are two forms of forward-looking analytics, where financial modeling is, again, financially focused, looking forward mostly. I mean, obviously, you do the financial analysis to prepare for some of your financial modeling looking forward. And in most cases, obviously, you're forecasting balance sheet P&Ls at a higher level as opposed to like really granular. Next question. Honestly, would you consider your Excel models or analysis hygienic for others to consume? And I think, you know, when you do the work, you're under pressure. Does it, you know, what does that actually mean? What does it mean to have something that's easy and hygienic to consume? For me, it's two words: structured and easy to use. So can I give that piece of analysis to someone else? And without, like, obviously saying, here's an analysis on this company, obviously telling them what you've done it on, but they can actually navigate and understand what's going on, and it's really well structured. So I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges is we're rushing, we do the analysis, but then we sort of create it for ourselves as opposed to thinking someone else is going to have a look at it. And certainly in our experience, when we look at client models, or we have to rebuild the model, we look at that and we can see that there's no structure, can't see the start and the end. It's just the spaghetti of formulas everywhere. And that's why I say often you have that third ball, you have a look and you say, I don't know what the hell's going on, and you know, really gives you a bit of a reaction.
Question.
Yeah.
Now, with the dynamic arrays rolling out over the last few years, like my experience of this has been that the individual formulas are more complex now because you're carrying a range, you're going to spill over a whole range of periods, and it's one formula is going to do all of that, versus in the old days where you may use different formulas at different periods based on what your model is. So you get more complicated formulas, but there's no copy errors with them.
Yeah.
So there's the formulas themselves start to feel like little programs at times.
Yeah. Yep.
With dynamic arrays.
Absolutely. We're going to cover that. Have you played with lambdas yet?
Yes, I have. You have to, if you're going to do a lot of serious work in dynamic arrays, you have to.
You have to. Correct. So if you think about, you know, like the one of, you know, the SUMIF formula, let's take that one. I'm pretty sure everyone's used SUMIF before. You are using a function that has been defined by Microsoft that sums up numbers based on a particular criteria. Everyone knows how to use a SUMIF. It's actually pretty simple. You have to break a SUMIF apart into the C# code underneath. It's pretty damn complex. Because it would have to try and match particular things. And of course, when you start looking at VLOOKUPs, index match, all of those. So one of the best ways to leverage dynamic arrays is through lambdas and through making it more simple for people to use and understand. But you're right, dynamic arrays without lambdas, but dynamic arrays generally can be quite overwhelming. And we're going to cover off some of those.
I find using the let function invaluable because it allows me to break a formula up and then build up the individual parts of it with lines and then combine it together at the end.
Yep.
It also makes debugging a lot more straightforward because you can focus on individual elements of it rather than having to deal with the whole function.
Agreed. Yeah, the let's extremely powerful. Have you ever built a model that had a scenario manager to help influence stakeholders? So when people say, you know, they do financial modeling, they're often talking about financial analysis, or they're talking about, I can do a forecast. Budgeting, planning, forecasting is a type of modeling, but it's not proper modeling. The reason I say it's not proper modeling, because modeling considers a range of different scenarios. That's what a model is. Someone's crafting they're actually changing it, they're evolving it. It's, you know, obviously once it's complete, but in many cases, a model gives you that sense of change, that sense of dynamic, looking at different set of numbers, looking at the bookends, the high, low, the medium, or worst case, best case, you know, base case. So if you're going to build a model and you're going to want to use it to influence some stakeholders, then you definitely want to consider building a scenario manager into it to make it easy for them to make changes, not having to go down on, row 525, cell E, pay, and they've now got to change that, right? So you want to make sure that that's easy to use, and the best way to do that is in a single page scenario manager, hooks into all the other places that you go, and you allow them to change that, whether through an in-cell drop down or a drop down box. Either way, really, really powerful and useful. Do you use a financial modelling standard or best practice approach to building models? We use accounting standards to make sure we comply with accounting standards, but when it comes to financial modelling, be a bit of the Wild West. Certainly in our experience, when we get engaged, we find it it's very, very, there's a very big range, and we can look at almost instantly at a model whether it's built according to a particular standard. In fact, we can actually look at the type of model that's built and identify the type of standard that it relates to, like a FAST model, because we can see that the FAST, they have a lot more spaced out, a lot more broken out. I think it's a bit more, probably too expansive, where certain models are a lot more smaller, but then the formulas are longer. So, there's that balance. Sometimes kind of, yes, probably, no doubt. So I think, again, a bit of a mixed bag. If you're wanting to learn how to build a model, definitely a good place to start is look at the financial modeling standards. There's a couple, the SMART, FAST, BPM, there's financial modeling code. Again, a lot of this comes in.
Can you say that the first word again, please?
FAST, SMART, BPM is the ICAEW, the UK financial modeling code. Again, we cover that a lot in our training. We actually go through the different standards and we talk about it. Standards are good, but they're not rules. You need to know that sometimes you've got to break them, right? So, standards are good up to a point until, like I said, I'm not a huge fan of the FAST standard because I think it breaks things out far too much. And also they put spaces in all their formulas, so it might be easier to read, but it's just, if I can do a formula quickly, as opposed to writing, 3 different lines of calculations. But again, that's a personal preference, but also what's the user gonna use. Okay, are you up to date in applying automation tools, best practice formulas, Excel, like Power Query, like dynamic arrays, like lambdas? I love Jimmy Fallon. So, who's going to win? So I think it's amazing. The amount of change that has happened in Excel over the last, few years has really been a game changer for us as well. It means that we are no longer dependent on an add-in to build models. We are now building models entirely out of Excel's native innovation and tech, and not having to use any other tools to do that. We've used some tools to connect to third-party systems like Xero, but to actually build the model, everything is available inside Excel already. Have you ever built a model that's created significant value? And I think until you build a model that actually gets used on a transaction or cash flow, whether it's a client or stakeholder, some models that we've created hundreds of millions of dollars for clients. Sadly, I wasn't paid anywhere close to that to build the model, but certainly when you can see the value that you're creating, you get to recognize the skills in its own right and how valuable that is for someone. And therefore, for you in your own business, for people that you work with, definitely something that is quite useful. In investment banking, of course, there's the entire divisions that rely on the skill, and investment bankings charge a truckload, and they would charge 4 or 5% of the equity or the assets. So one of the first models that I built when I was in Investec Bank, my salary was nowhere near the fee that the bank charged. In the end, the bank charged an $8 million fee for a model that, yes, okay, it took me a long time to build and we worked on it, but that generated a lot of value. It allowed them to raise $125 million in equity and have over $230 million in assets. So were they worried about an $8 million fee? No, they've got significant value out of that. And so it all becomes just numbers, but the value of that model surpasses the time and the effort that goes into it. And that's why the value of the skill is so important. Was there a hand up?
A friend of mine created a share trading model. He didn't have to work. He let it set up at home. He just did little tweaks every now and again, and he was just making bucket loads of money. So that was about 20 years ago.
I think you could do
possibilities out there.
I think you could do that 20 years ago. I don't think you can do that anymore because of just the way in which you have to get access to data so much quicker, and there's algorithms and bots that are trading faster than a human can trade. So yeah, back 20 years ago, I can see that absolutely is an area. There might be, but I think it's those arbitrage opportunities are certainly less and less. Have you ever conducted Excel training or support either internally or externally? I think one of the things that I learned in developing my own skills that until I actually became a trainer, until I actually started to teach other people how to use Excel, you really don't harness your skills. You know, you can only be as good as what you do, but when you have to communicate and explain something to other people, it's really where you can take your skills to a whole new level. Even if that's conducting internal training for your team, or even just take a segment of some functions like unique or sequence in some of the dynamic array functions. Even if it's just teaching people how to use tables properly with structured referencing, it can be really useful. So I've got quite a few trainers, which is great. How would you rate your knowledge of data analytics and Power BI? And I guess I went on a Power BI journey over 5 years ago because I saw that whilst I was good at Excel and good at financial modeling, I lacked that ability to crunch bigger data sets. I lacked the ability to publish and distribute without sharing models everywhere. And I think it's a really powerful capability to develop. The great thing about Power BI is that it's got the similar sort of functions like Power Query sitting in both tools. So if you're using Power Query in Excel, you've already learned one of the 4 pillars in Power BI, which is Power Query. So definitely an area to expand and build. See, most of the people are just entry-level users, so you can use Power BI, but actually building an entire data model star schema with reports. It's good to see that more people are embracing that.
Lance, DAX is also within Power Pivot, so you sort of get that as well for free, I guess. Trying to transition.
True. DAX, absolutely. DAX is, I think, where I start to sort of jump across. I learned DAX more in Power BI than in Excel, and in fact, I learned Power Query in Power BI before I started using it in Excel. But I think if you start using DAX in Excel, then you want to visualize that. The visualization of a data model in Excel is not great at all. So if you're going to go down that deeper path, then definitely. But you're right. You can sort of start dabbling with DAX in Excel, but presenting it obviously is going to be a challenge.
Sorry. How would you compare between Power Query, Power BI, and Tableau?
Well, Power Query is a function within Excel and Power BI, so it's not part of. I wouldn't compare Power Query to Power BI because Power Query is inside Power BI. So you're saying just Power BI and Tableau? It's a great question because when I started to think about upgrading my own skills in data analytics, I had to choose a tool. And at that point, Tableau was the dominator and had been for a very long time. And Power BI had only just started. I think when I started using Power BI, I think it was only a couple of years old, two or 3 years old. So, but I decided because I was already Excel literate and I already had at least understanding of Power Query, that I could start to go on that journey. Power BI is far superior from a data ETL perspective than Tableau. You've got Tableau Prep and Tableau Viewer. You've got a whole bunch of other things you've got to learn in the Tableau. The visuals out of the box for Tableau are better than Power BI, but Power BI has an app source. There's an entire ecosystem of apps that plug into Power BI that now surpass Tableau's visuals. Tableau is on the Gartner Magic Quadrant in terms of research. Power BI is absolutely the leader and dominator. So definitely something to think about. But for me, I like to stay in the same environment and leverage that. So for those that saw the video online of me updating a model and then pushing it to Power BI, I do have it here. If we've got time towards the end, I can show that. But the integration between Excel and Power BI is phenomenal. It's just so much easier to understand and connect and leverage that knowledge. I just haven't wasted my time with Tableau. You can only cover so many tools and go deep and be good enough to trade in that tool. Have you been using any of the AI-based large language models? ChatGPT, Bing, Gemini? I think it's certainly an interesting world we're living in at the moment. I have found for training, for summarizing information, for writing articles, for getting visuals, for doing marketing, a lot of things. AI is amazing. I have an idea. I want to understand it. I want to explore it. It's really game changing. However, there are pitfalls. The AI is only as good as the data that gets fed into it. How the algorithm's programmed and who it's programmed by, and what sort of innate biases it has, you've got to be aware of that. Particularly for building models, not quite there yet, but there's still a way to come. No way it's the devil. Yes, I know. In fact, my good colleague Mark on the call has got that very strong opinion, and I think it starts to get a bit scary, right, in terms of what we're doing. But I think we just got to be very, very watchful as to this train's not going to slow down. And that's my view, and so I'd rather be on it and learning and growing, whilst putting on some big boy pants to make sure it doesn't get me the wrong way. Use it frequently, but struggle to see business benefits. I think one of the things you'll be surprised is actually giving it the creative nature of it is far superior than what I'd ever thought or what anyone thought around creativity. So if you're thinking that things like marketing, things like AI, visuals, certainly quite useful and powerful. From a financial modeling perspective, I'm going to cover some examples later of where it can be useful. Future topics. So last question, future topics in terms of what you want to hear about. Please pop them onto the, so it's a bit of a workload. We'll obviously we're looking to do these meetups once a quarter, and definitely come back and I'd love to hear further from everyone else if they want to hear some more or learn more about some of these topics. So I'm going to go back to the slides now. Present. Hopefully I haven't lost people online. I'm going to share the screen and I'll make sure to share it with audio as well. Okay, probably should have started the agenda, but we had some technical issues at the beginning. How do I minimize that window? Oh, you can see it on there. I'll read it. So we obviously did the pulse check. We're going to go through the finance tech stack and Excel innovation and what's happened there. Financial modeling, dynamic arrays, lambdas, Power BI, Fabric, AI assistance in financial modeling. We're going to touch on that, and then I guess future topics as well. So the pulse check we just completed. So this is where often people get confused, and we spoke a little bit about that, about financial modeling, data analytics, and automation. And automation is obviously spanning all of these different areas, particularly around AI, and we'll cover some of those aspects. Financial modeling, I talk about the three-statement modeling, scenario analysis, sensitivities, and in some cases, Monte Carlo simulation. Analytics is about looking backwards, diagnostic and descriptive, and then looking forward, predictive and prescriptive. And again, AI starts to come and have a play and feature quite a bit in the predictive and prescriptive space as well. Excel innovation since 2018 has been phenomenal. So dynamic arrays, for those that haven't played with it, came out around that time. XLOOKUP as well, to simplify, make VLOOKUP, because lots of people use VLOOKUP quite extensively, but VLOOKUP was quite limiting, was quite restrictive, and particularly if you added new rows, where XLOOKUP feels a lot more like an index match hybrid. I'm still an index match fan, but occasionally I'll use XLOOKUP, but I don't touch VLOOKUPs. Lambda functions, I guess, making Excel Turing complete. So what that means is actually allowing a system to be fully programmable end to end. So Alan Turing was a guy who created a machine that could do that. So if you think about Excel before lambdas, and you were building an Excel model and you had to build a custom function, you had to get out of Excel, go into your VBA and code VBA. So you couldn't actually do that all within the Excel interface, whereas Lambda allows you to do that. So that XMIRR example that I gave earlier, you can now code that as a custom function within Excel using many of the Lambda functions, but also you can create your own. The data types, there's new data types if you haven't used it, geography, stocks, and there's a range of those. And then AI enhancements, I guess those are just going to come more and more and more through Copilot and others, and certainly going to be an exciting journey. Now, 6 generations of financial modeling. I first came across this concept with last year when I was doing a meetup with Craig Hatmaker, Daniel, and Jeff Robson. And so Craig came up with this concept of 5 generations of financial modeling. So the first generation is majority of spreadsheet people, financial modelers, analysts today, because they're just using what I call old Excel. So old Excel is just your standard formulas, no dynamic arrays, no lambdas, no Power Query, maybe a bit of tables if you're lucky, but chances are if they're using tables, they'd be using dynamic arrays. So they're probably not even using tables. And so the old Excel is what we call first generation, whether it was VisiCalc or whatever, or, hasn't really evolved much. The second generation is really when we start putting in some of those standards and design around the modeling, whether it's fast, smart, BPM. I've been using BPM for a long time, and we make some changes to it as we need to. Certainly BPM doesn't consider the latest vertical, it's just horizontal ways of modeling, but now we can model vertically as well, which is quite powerful. 3G modeling was the innovation with third-party add-ins, and I have to admit that I got stuck there for a long time on the 3rd generation. And the important thing is these filled gaps that existed in Excel in terms of building scalable models. Scalable models actually weren't that easy to build unless you did a truckload of VBA, which is the other option. And then, VBA has its challenges. So for a long time, the 3rd generation dominated that market. But we started playing with modern Excel through Power Query, dynamic arrays, and lambdas over, about 2 years ago. Because we could see the trend of where Microsoft was going to make things more scalable, less error prone, and faster. There's a YouTube video where I ran 16,000 simulations on Monte Carlo in about 4 seconds. If you ran that with VBA, it would take you, significantly longer. So I think it's, certainly the calculation engine and what they've done is pretty impressive. 5G is really taking the Lambda functions, packaging them up, and using it through what's called the advanced formula environment through GitHub. So you can start to package each of those Lambda functions which you've created, and I'm going to show you an example of those. Craig has coined his 5G because he thinks it's, this is that next wave, this next change of modeling where I'm not using anything else other than these functions that are pre-built for me. So now I want to create a depreciation schedule I can use one function for the entire schedule. Opening balance or purchase price, life or useful life or rate, and it'll do the calculation for me. Opening, closing, movement, the whole lot, one formula, an entire depreciation schedule. Loan repayments, and which I've got an example here, one formula. You know, what you're doing is you're packaging all that knowledge that a financial modeler has and building that into one formula, and it's reusable and you can test it. The 10th generation in financial modeling is using Power BI and Microsoft Fabric, which I showed at the Global Summit recently. So being able to take modeling to another big level, because one of the challenges with 1 to 5 is it's still Excel. And the challenge with that is the data. So when you want to grow the data, you want to use more data, get different sources without jumping into a full data warehouse, which of course some people do. You can actually build that through Fabric. Microsoft Fabric's got a data platform that's, again, coming more and more in terms of being able to scale modeling, where you're not then limited by a million rows. You can go far beyond that. So I'm going to show you a quick example, you know, a normal formula and then how that works with dynamic arrays. So you can see that these formulas, they spill all the way across. Sorry, what was your name again? Wayne. As Wayne explained, that spill function, there's a single formula and it goes all the way across, is an incredible way to write formulas. So you can actually convert standard models into dynamic models and using dynamic arrays, but certain instances, like the one I'm going to show you now, becomes a little bit more challenging. Now, Craig recorded these and certainly quite useful to explain it. So I'm going to let the AI do the talking rather than me, and hopefully this comes through clearly.
Here is simple corkscrew that creates a cumulative total for each period. The traditional method is simple but static. Dynamic arrays cannot replicate this calculation without lambdas. The lambda formulas are not simple, but their results are dynamic. 5G uses one function in one cell to make this calculation simple and dynamic.
I'm going to go back to that last screen and pause, because I think this really explains the...
Here is simple corkscrew. Here is simple corkscrew.
Let me go there. But what you noticed was that formula spilled one all the way through, opening, closing, movement, the whole lot. And that's certainly going to make life a lot easier as a financial modeler. It's going to reduce error rates and it's going to give you that reusability, because that's what scalable modeling is. It's reusable pieces of your model, which allows you to do that through modules. So this is another example. Now, this is a loan schedule. So what you can see here, there's no sound to this, but what you can see is really the ability to, you have an amount, you have an annualized percentage rate, you have the term in months, you have the start, you have the modeling period. All of these go into one formula, single formula, and it spills the whole lot. So this is a formula that obviously Craig had developed. So I'll let it play on. So when this gets you around the whole, I've got to really make this complex for someone to read, they can see it, they can test it, they can believe it. And it's only going to be easier to understand. Certainly when you click on the function, it tells you which each of the inputs are. And again, as a modeler, you have to trust the modeler. They're either trustworthy or not. But when you use it time and time again, like any model, over time, accuracy improves and you get used to that. So one formula spills all the way across. Any questions?
Let's just say you define, say, term, where it says 48 or F133, right?
Yep.
Could you write term in that formula, in that function there? Like, and it will pick that term just like you use it when you reference it?
Yeah, that's just the name range.
Yeah.
So instead of saying F132, you could just write term. Yeah, so you could go, yeah, but that's just, so a lambda function is a normal Excel function. This the lambda function is bxf.loan with a little lambda next to it. It's like a normal formula. You can just add whatever.
And the source of that function, is that like in his GitHub or where he like?
Yeah, so Craig's got a GitHub. It's available. You can go and you can download. By the way, Craig's given all of this away for free. His entire 5G is completely free. So you can go. I know it's crazy, but anyway, it's great. He's doing the right thing. He's giving it away for free. He's wanting more and more people to embrace this, and I think that's very honourable, as well as being incredibly powerful. So yeah, you could go in, you can see it, you can understand it. I mean, how often do people document their models to say, this is what my model does, this is where it links to, you know, by doing something like that, you actually, you know, it allows you.
Yeah.
Allows you to actually use that function. Yes, you do have to use the Excel Labs. So you got to add in the Excel for Microsoft, and within Excel Labs is the advanced formula environment. And then you literally copy and paste. If you go onto his website, you'll see it. You copy and paste the GitHub link into that, and it'll download all his 5G.
Hans, I have a question. So if that's the case, and you want to hand over the model to a client, then does that mean the client also needs to do all the analysis? No. It's in the file.
It's in the file. So what happens is it downloads it to that file, and it sits as functions in that file. Cool. Yeah.
Works on Mac.
Don't ask me that. Many questions that I'll answer, but so the answer is yes with Bootcamp or Parallels. You might as well run Excel. So it's a Microsoft environment inside a Mac is what Bootcamp and Parallels are. So despite what people think, Excel for Mac is not Excel, you know, within a Windows Excel environment. They're a lot closer because Power Query now works, and they have done some VBA enhancements, but the VBA between, and we actually had a project that challenge. The VBA is not necessarily consistent across Mac and
the underlying issue will be the chipset, because they came from a PowerPC, which was an IBM chipset, and then when they went to Intel in 2010ish or 11, there was a convergence. There was a real convergence between the two of them, and now Mac have gone. Now Apple have now decided they want the chipset again, and they're now doing Power PC, whatever Power chips, whatever they call it, M1 and M2, because they're now writing their own chipsets. You can't compile the old Mac software into the new chipsets because they've rewritten it all. So Microsoft are kind of throwing their hands in there and going, stuff this, it's all sort of by a Windows-based machine.
Yeah.
We'll give you the basic features, but we're not going to give you anything basic features.
Query works on Mac now.
Power Query works on Mac now. Yes, about 5 or 6 months ago, I think they released it to Mac. Okay, so let's compare.
Complex corkscrew.
Sorry. So everyone familiar with a corkscrew? Opening, closing, movement, kind of standard in financial modelling when you think about loan amortization.
Oh, we talk about wine.
Wine? There's some wine outside. We can have some wine later. We can have.
Right.
But no, this is more about actually when you think about building models, you often have, particularly around loans, fixed assets, you have your corkscrew calculation.
Here is a more complex corkscrew. It adds calculations prior to the closing balance that reference the opening balance. In this example, the loan interest amount is calculated based on the opening balance. The closing balance references both the opening balance and the interest amount. While this calculation is fairly easy to do with traditional modelling methods, the results are not compatible with dynamic models. Once again, to add this calculation to a dynamic model requires lambda. Specifically, this type of corkscrew requires a named lambda. This is because this corkscrew requires recursion. Recursion is when a function calls itself, and for a function to call itself, it must be named.
Yeah, so recursion, another easier way to understand recursion is circular reference. So when you're trying to calculate something that's based on the answer to that calculation, you have a circular reference. Now, to get away from that with interest, you do it on the opening balance, which is kind of what this is, but sometimes you can't. Sometimes the period that you are working with needs to refer to the part period within that period as well. So you have circular referencing. To solve that in Excel now, you either do turn on iterations, don't approve of that method, but in the US they do, and then let it self-calculate. My pre this approach would have been having a breaker and have a goal seek. So you have the line, you have the calculation, and you copy paste, and you use that through either goal seek function or VBA. Just record it and run it. At least you can see the logic, and there's an error check rather than just. The problem with iterations, you make another circular reference and you never know where it is, and it'll come back to bite you. But of course, yeah, if you've got dynamic arrays and lambdas, you can get around that as well.
Is it US? Why would the US enable iterations?
The US financial modelers from the US just seem to be more okay with iterations.
Okay.
And it can be enabled everywhere.
Attitude,
but it's an attitude thing. I think they just think, oh, it's easy enough, just do it. I got bitten badly by iterations once in investment banking, and I'll never go back again. I was trying to balance a model, and the whole model imploded because I was using iterations, and it took me ages to find that I'm not doing that again. So lessons hard learned, but there's still people there that use it. Excel or Power BI. So I think, it's a really good thing to think about because, as I said before, there are four pillars that exist in both around Power Query, your ETL, your extract, transform, and load process. You've got your Power Pivots, which is also your data model in Power BI. DAX exists in both. And then you've got charts and you've got, your visualizations. But your charts in Excel are not really going to interact as well as your Power BI visuals will interact with your data model. So visuals with normal Excel, no problem. But the moment you want to use data visualization and you want to slice and dice and you want to have interaction, then of course Power BI. So definitely you want to think about, as you go on this journey, what does flexibility versus scalability? That's your decision point. So if I'm wanting a high degree of flexibility, I'm staying with Excel. If I want a high degree of scalability, I'm putting less of the hard work in Excel and I'm putting more of the hard work somewhere else. That might be in a data warehouse. It might be in Power BI. It might be, that's my wife. Probably should have told her I was telling. Ultimately, it's about that scalability and what you're trying to achieve. So when size matter, it becomes a big problem. So one of the challenges, when I first started, we built on one occasion, we built a 26 childcare center model. We had to manage 5 different workbooks and an aggregation workbook. Becomes challenging. I did 17, personally, I built it before Alex joined the team. I built multiple crunch gyms. Each gym had a separate model, and I had all of those models. Now, they were all built the same way. They were highly scalable in terms of it, but I had to then connect all those models and have an export tab. So becomes really, really challenging. And again, distributing the data and sharing that, you're going to share 17 models and 17 workbooks. So, you get the wild west of spreadsheets when you start to get data challenges. Yes, there are third-party online analytical processing tools, or OLAP cubes. Again, those enable some element of scalability, but now you've got to deal with a cube. And if anyone has come across a cube, they're not necessarily the easiest things to deal with, and they're not necessarily transparent as well. They're not necessarily as flexible as a star schema that you would in a Power BI data model. But I think the future is really looking at Fabric, and you're looking at data flows, data marts, and you're starting to scale. Yes, there's a number of spreadsheets or less. Again, Excel's not dead. It's not going anywhere, but how I'm using it is very different. So I'm using it as an interface tool to change assumptions, to run scenarios, but the calculation is sitting somewhere else. And of course, the visualization is sitting somewhere else. And sometimes the output is also going back to Excel. So, that's really how you would solve some of those challenges. But sticking with Excel is painful if you need that scale.
Tools like data rails sort of fit into this.
Data Rails is, again, another third party. I think they also run, I have an OLAP system. I think they've also got a connection to a data warehouse online. And certainly I haven't played with that particular tool directly, but they have their own integration. So all of those tools, whether it's Data Rails, Anaplan, all of them, they have their own data warehouse and it connects to it. So to some degree, if Data Rails doesn't need a native scripting language like Anaplan does and some of the other OLAP, then I suspect it's quite a good tool. But I can build something in Fabric with Power Query. I can build a data schema, I can write some DAX, and I can do all of that through data marts. So for me, it's just like, why would I go learn another tool? Because they would have their own native functions that would be different to what I would be using. So now what happens if my client wants to use it? Well, now they've got to go get that tool as well. And I find that's always the rub, is when you're starting to sort of force your client to get a tool when you wanting to use something.
So it's a little bit like how Power BI's come in and really displaced Tableau, that Fabric is doing the same for a lot of its third-party data tools.
100%. Yeah, that is the disruption that's happening at the moment, particularly when you've got some of the third-party tools that sit inside Power BI, like InfoRiver, ValQ, are really, really powerful. They give you Excel-like features without running any DAX, and you can do forecasting, and you can do scenario analysis with click and drag, graphical user interfaces.
You need to understand that all this stuff started, like particularly cubes, TM1 and all the rest of them, because in the early 2000s, people had vast quantities of data in Excel. They got nothing in the middle. So all these companies pile in and wrote these proprietary software effectively, like to give you modeling functionality and forecasting and reporting functionality. You stick crystal reports over the top of it. And, it was a star schema of applications, literally. Because there was no one, this stack didn't exist. And it all came from a need. Now Microsoft, 20 years later, is finally playing catch up.
Yeah.
And they've finally stitched it all together.
Yeah.
Nice.
Stitching up.
Nice.
Yeah. So Microsoft Fabric includes your data factory, your data engineering, data warehousing, also data science, real-time analytics, and Power BI. So it's the whole package. So you're not just getting, someone thought so Power BI is just, Fabric's just a rebrand of Power BI. It's not. It's a data platform, exactly what you were saying. It's really bringing all of those tools, but also to you in a way that you can use it. So I don't use SQL scripts. I do nothing. I'm as lazy as they come to building models, yet I can use these tools because I know how to use Power Query and I know how to do DAX and I know how to build visualizations. I do not need a data engineer to build an end-to-end solution. And this is an example that I built, and I actually showed it at the Power BI Global Summit this year. So using a data source, used Excel as an example, used an ETL being data flows Gen 2, which is effectively your extract, transform, and load. It's Power Query. Data flows is Power Query Online. So they're reusing the same functionality and tooling across Excel, Power BI, and data flows, which is online. And then I'm storing that in a staging lakehouse. Then that becomes your semantic model, or what used to be called data sets. They changed names and confuse everyone. And then you've got your report and as well to publish that too. Another way is through data marts. So data marts allows you to quarantine parts of your database and parts of your Fabric storage to different roles, and therefore allows you to give role level security and object level security. So if you want finance to have access to data, you want HR to have different access to data, you want ops to have different access to data, you create them through what's called data marts. They've used the term for that that tool as well. And again, quite easy. Data mart includes Power Query. It includes a few other role definitions and then assigning different data sets to different roles. You've got source, data mart, again, semantic model, Power BI report, and then the app. All of this, by the way, is also available with Danielle. We did a meetup last year. It was the third version of the AI feature of financial modeling, where I'll show some of these models live as well. So that's the example there. In this case, this was actually a fast model. So what I did here was I said, well, Fabric and Power BI and this entire stack, people might look at it and say, well, I build models in the way that it suits me. So how can I be sure that this tech will work with any modeling standard? So that's exactly what I did. I took another model built on fast and put it into Power BI. Model that I never even built. All we did was we used the same structured tables and lambdas and dynamic arrays to flip it, put into table structures, use Power Query, and a lot of this Maddie actually did a lot of the work. So I can't take all the kudos for it. And then Monte Carlo simulation. So creating measures, and DAX is probably one of the hardest things to learn in Power BI. But now you've got Copilot, where you can start to ask questions and create formulas within it. So Copilot was released into Power BI before any other Microsoft product. It came in before Edge. So if you want to have a bit of a dabble, I would be wary of the DAX. It's not the most efficient DAX, but it gets you out of jail and certainly gets you started. So that's something that's important. Okay, AI in financial modeling. I loved this when I first saw it. I couldn't resist by not playing it again. So this is Craig. He's built 5G. He talks about it, but he also talks about how, where's AI going to play in the context of financial modeling.
Hi, I'm Craig Hatmaker's AI avatar. My voice was created on 11labs.io and my animation was created on studio.d-id.com.
Pretty amazing. If you haven't played with it, that's entirely. Now he's given up his voice, his credentials, everything to AI. That's his call. But ultimately, also that AI avatar earlier that was talking through those formulas, he built those as well on 11 Labs.
Younger? Didn't want to make himself look younger. What you got?
Could have, absolutely. I think you wouldn't believe him if he was younger, right? Look, Craig's done great in terms of our industry, and certainly worth looking at. AI has exploded, whether it's text, image, voice, as you saw, animation. One of the things to be wary of with AI is right now they're language models, not necessarily calculation models. So be very wary of. Firstly, you shouldn't be putting any client data into it, number one. But if you are, just be wary that the calculations, it's getting better, and there's some plugins like Wolfram and others that can enhance calculations, but you're fundamentally dealing with a language model, not a calculation model. It works with tokens and breaks up language into different tokens and then stitches it together. And obviously it's used in many cases, the internet. There's different types of language models. DaVinci is one of them from ChatGPT, and there's different parameters and temperature. So there's things like creativity and randomness. So be very careful when you're using output of an AI, because if it doesn't actually know the answer, it's going to make it up. And it's called hallucination, and it exists. So if you didn't hear about the US lawyer that went in front of the judge and started quoting all these US cases of which he used his argument, the judge turned around and said, I haven't heard of those cases, where they're from. It's like, oh, well, I got it from ChatGPT. And straight away, completely made up. And of course, that lawyer got disbarred, not only lost the case. So again, you think that lawyers would be smart enough, but really people believe that he just thought it was the internet. He just thought that ChatGPT was just a copy and paste of the internet, and that's what it was. So it's not. It's using a lot of the data from the internet. And in fact, I think there's a long legal case that's going to go on about, how it's used to develop that. But that's important. So understanding the data, the source, the algorithm, prompting and prompt structures and prompt engineering is another important part of that. and how you design your prompts and giving your AI an avatar and saying, look, you are my marketing expert. I need you to do X, Y, and Z. Giving it context. I know it feels weird, but actually that's one way to actually get a really good result out of it. And why does it get it wrong? Because it does. It's a language model, not a calculation model, and it's pre-programmed, right? It's pre-programmed with certain algorithms. If you ask it to tell a joke, the joke's not politically correct for a certain type of individual or race or religion. In some cases, it'll tell you a joke about Donald Trump, but it won't tell you a joke about Joe Biden. So there you go. Things to think about when you're starting to ask questions and use it. Clarity, specificity, guided formatting, all of these things are an important part of using AI. In making sure that you have your awareness. So for ChatGPT, September 21, I don't use ChatGPT anymore. I use Bing. I use Copilot within Edge. It's within my organization. It's up to date. It's got live information. So if you are going to start using it, I'd say pay ChatGPT if you've got it enabled. If you don't have it enabled, speak to your IT. And they should be able to do it. But that's something that is really, really useful. And just experiment. I think you'll absolutely be gobsmacked. I don't Google anymore. I Copilot, whatever that is. I have an action you can put to that. So, Microsoft Excel and obviously Copilot. Jeff did a demonstration. He created some VBA. I then had to play with it. And, you can do all sorts of things like explain for. Now, this isn't Copilot. I haven't played with it yet, but very similar. This is an add-in that uses ChatGPT, but you're going to be able to do all these sort of things like explain formulas. Someone's got that really complex formula, being able to explain it. To write formulas for you. Now, again, just like writing the DAX, I'd be very wary. Make sure that, it's not necessarily the most efficient way to do it. If you're not sure, yes, good to get started, but don't just blindly follow what it's doing. Automated commentary on dashboards is a really important thing to be wary of as well. Understanding at some stage, not right now, you're going to leave a meeting. Hey, Bing or ChatGPT, I want a model, and have that delivered at the end. So what you have to realize is AI itself is not going to replace you, but the people that know how to use it and leverage it will, right? We'll be able to do things faster, quicker, more accurately than people that are not. So hence why I'm on the train, joining the ride, as opposed to sitting at the station watching the train go past. Yes, I've got to be careful. Yes, I've got to watch what I'm doing. Yes, I'm making sure I'm not giving it information that's confidential, but absolutely it'll help. Okay, future topics, whether people want to go deeper into 4 and 5G, so that's dynamic array lambdas, or the 6G Power BI and Fabric. Useful resources, definitely worth having a look at. The Financial Modelling Institute is one. We built a financial modelling knowledge hub. There's 35 world experts. We now got one article left. I released one just the other week in terms of a financial modelling strategy. How do you build a financial modelling strategy in an organization? If you haven't seen that article, it's on LinkedIn. I released it last week. Listening to podcasts. There was a financial modelling podcast by Matthew Bernath. I think he sort of hasn't kept that up to date, but there's a new one with Paul Barnhurst called the Financial Modeller's Corner. Again, if you want to learn more in the space, that's a great one. But my go-to podcast at the moment is Explicit Measures. The guys, Tommy, Seth, and Mike, talking all things Power BI. And they're not just talking about Power BI, they're talking about data culture, data literacy. At one stage, they were asking ChatGPT to answer some of the questions that they were debating. It was quite interesting. But they're talking about all the elements of data, but of course with a Power BI lens. So definitely an area to think about. And the last bit is thank you. Hope you've enjoyed it. Stay in touch. There's the QR code for those that want to follow me on LinkedIn. I am quite prolific and I continue to be. I've been a bit quiet for a while, but now going to be a lot more active. So hopefully that's quite useful. And are there any questions online, Vijaya? Are there any questions in the audience?
So far, not Lance.
Excuse me, I've just got a simple question. So some of us registered using Meetup and some registered using LinkedIn. What was the LinkedIn site or group that you used?
So the LinkedIn had a link to online, which is the Microsoft Teams, and it also had a link to Meetup. So if you were if Meetup was for in person, and then within the Meetup there was also a link to the Teams link. So
if you follow Lance, it popped up on one of his things. I think that's what you're asking is how do I find it? Follow Lance, okay? Very nice man. You can tell that.
Michael, I appreciate it.
Help Lance.
So yeah, so we will send out the recording and everything else. So actually, let's have a look at those words. What did we see? So we had. Actually, I'll share my screen. Oh, actually, no, people can see that. Power BI, data cleansing, dynamic arrays. I assume that's Python in Excel. Alex, you want to do Python in Excel for the next meetup? There's certainly lots to explore in terms of what's happening in Excel. I think Python in Excel is going to be quite interesting. I'm not convinced that for financial modelers it's necessarily well go, but
It's data. It's the data handling.
it's a data hand. Correct. So for me, it's like Python in Excel, but Python in Power BI, absolutely. So I think when you're starting to look at, the bigger data ecosystem and predictive and prescriptive, and you want end-to-end coding, yes, Python. But again, that's horses for courses in terms of what you focus on. Okay. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks for everyone that joined online. Sorry about the glitches initially. It sounds like we did get at least a good recording done. And for those that are here in Melbourne, there's some drinks and snacks outside. So feel free to hang around. And I need to call my wife back. Thanks everyone.
Thank you. Thanks.